The Hindu, there is an editorial titled "The Law of Sedition is Unconstitutional." This editorial is important for GS2, that is structure, organization and functioning of the executive and the judiciary. In this editorial, the author mentioned that a democratic country like India must review the Kedarnath judgment on sedition law. So author gave 5 reasons for reviewing it. Before we look into those 5 reasons, first we will see what is Kedarnath case 1962. The Kedarnath case or Kedarnath judgment upheld the constitutional validity of section 124A of the IPC. In that case, the court held that only writings or speeches which incite people to violence against the government will come within the ambit of sedition. Recently, in Vinod Dua's case 2021, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed the law of sedition upheld in the Kedarnath case 1962. Now we will see the 5 reasons mentioned by the author to review the Kedarnath judgment on sedition law. First reason is the Supreme Court ruling in Kedarnath has been continuously ignored. For example, court held that only writings or speeches which incite people to violence against the government will come within the ambit of sedition, whereas those who criticize government authorities are also charged with sedition. Hence, this is inconsistent with Kedarnath judgment, that is merely criticizing the government authorities without inciting the people to violence against the government are also leading to the cases of sedition. Another example is the recent Lakshadweep case. Second reason is that section 124A of the IPC clearly violates Article 19 subclause 1 subclause A of the Constitution. That is the right to freedom of speech and expression. Further, the Kedarnath judgment opens the door for misuse by making it conditional. It states that the law will intervene only where the statements written or spoken have the harmful tendency or purpose of causing public disorder. So, if a policeman thinks that a cartoon has the harmful tendency to create public disorder, he will arrest that cartoonist. So it is the policeman and the law enforcement machinery who would decide whether a person's behavior was seditious or not. Third reason, section 124A is not a reasonable restriction in Constitution of India. That is, Article 19 subclause 2 confers the right on the state to impose reasonable restriction on the exercise of the freedom of speech and expression on the grounds of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, contempt of court, defamation and incitement to an offense. So mere criticism of government authorities is a part of freedom of speech and expression. It cannot be restricted on the ground of sedition. So sedition is not a part of reasonable restriction in our constitution. Also, remember that sedition as a reasonable restriction was included in the draft constitution but was deleted during the adoption of the constitution. Fourth reason is that this law, that is sedition law, was enacted by the British colonial government with the sole objective of suppressing all the voices of Indians. For example, in 1891, the Bango Basi case. Another similar case was of Bal Gangadhar Tilak case in 1897 and 1908. Also, Mahatma Gandhi's case in 1922. It was held that a mere comment has the potential to cause disaffection towards the government, that is during the colonial period. Even Justice Arthur Strachey in Tilak's case had made it absolutely clear that even attempt to cause disaffection would attract the provision of sedition. These arguments do not stand valid after the adoption of the constitution, that is in Free India. However, Supreme Court adopted the reasoning given by the federal court in Niharendu Datta Majumdar versus Emperor in 1942, in which it was held that the gist of the offence of sedition is a public disorder or a reasonable apprehension of public disorder. Lastly, this law should be removed for being unconstitutional. But the Supreme Court judgment has softened it. Supreme Court emphasized the word public order used in Article 19 subclause 2 and this made the offence of sedition constitutionally valid. So these are the 5 reasons. But if you see, people have the right to criticize the government, which is a part and parcel of democracy. Hence, the law of sedition, which penalize people for criticizing the government, should be declared unconstitutional. Now, what can be the expected mains question? It can be like this: the law of sedition is more in use because of its misuse rather than genuineness. In this context, discuss the need to review the law of sedition. In The Hindu, there is an editorial titled Keeping Alive Conversation About AIDS. This editorial is important for GS2, that is issues relating to development and management of social sector as well as services relating to health. In this editorial, author talks about the urgent need to control HIV AIDS. Now, why there is a need to control HIV AIDS? If you see the current trend, the HIV infection diagnosis rate dropped from 60% in 2010 to 23% in 2019. Also, the mortality rate doubled and the new cases increased 5 times more during the period. This happened because the campaign to educate and empower the vulnerable communities like MSM, that is men who have sex with men, IDU, that is injecting drugs user, migrant and sex workers, and truck drivers is not happening. Now, if you look at India's past strategy to control HIV AIDS, India became one of the most successful countries in the world in combating the HIV AIDS disease between 97 and 2010. In 2012, the center hailed the achievement of managing AIDS as a minor step towards in the long process of combating the disease. However, now India is lagging behind the targets. For example, WHO aimed that 90% of persons living with HIV AIDS will be on antiretroviral medication by 2020. Now at least 5 years have been added to the deadline. Means earlier it was 2020, now 2025. Also, former Union Health Secretary and Director of National AIDS Control Organization, that is Mr. Prasada Rao, is concerned that the country's hard-won success may be in danger. In this editorial, author has given 4 recommendations to control HIV/AIDS. First is resource mobilization. That is, hence, there is a need of strong political leadership, financial support, advocacy, and activism, which are crucial for the successful handling of the movement. A long-term view of AIDS beyond the health sector and socio-economic impacts of the epidemic should be considered. Second is the need of good policy framework. That is, to contain AIDS, a multi-sectoral and multi-pronged strategy is required. Supporting science-driven approaches, good quality data, and empirical evidence, as well as consolidating guidelines, are necessary to combat any medical crisis. The nationalized AIDS treatment plan is a perfect example of how early detection, diagnosis, and treatment saved many lives. Third is dedicated human resource. The National AIDS Control Program experience in dealing with HIV needs to be tapped in. Also, the existing workforce in 21,000 integrated counseling and testing centers must be well equipped. They can help in the early detection of infections, reduce vulnerability, and link people with care and treatment services. Fourth is the high priority to HIV/AIDS disease. That is, the government needs to change its priorities and re-energize the integrated counseling and testing centers to uphold the right to treatment and dignity of individuals affected by diseases. Using the available tools in the healthcare system is the best way to mainstream health crises like HIV/AIDS. Now, what expected question in mains from this topic? Like, for example, HIV/AIDS has been neglected in recent years due to pandemic. In this context, discuss the appropriate health model needed to control HIV/AIDS in India. In The Hindu, there is an editorial titled Reopen the Files, Reconsider Privatization. This editorial is important for GS3, that is, effects of liberalization on the economy, changes in the industrial policy, and their effects on industrial growth. In this editorial, the author tries to examine an alternative to privatization of public enterprises. Currently, privatization is now happening with a great vigor and dedicated targets. At the same time, India is going through its worst economic crisis, such as unemployment has increased, incomes are falling, and the fiscal deficit is also rising. In this situation, the outright privatization may not be justified. In past also, privatization of the public sector, including banks, has been a part of economic reforms since 1991. This was at the core of the Washington Consensus, which believes that the private sector is inherently more efficient. However, during that time also, the socio-political realities of India prevented outright privatization. Now, why author is interested in an alternative to privatization of public enterprises? Because there are four concerns associated with outright privatization. First is the limited number of Indian private firms. Means the number of Indian private firms which can buy out public sector firms is limited. Their limited financial and managerial resources can be better utilized. For example, in taking over numerous private firms that are available for sale through the bankruptcy process. Also, in investing in various brownfield and greenfield projects. So their resources must be utilized there. Second is that privatization is against the concept of Atmanirbhar. That is the sale at fair or lower than fair valuation to foreign entities has adverse implication for India or also Atmanirbhar project. Third is that the concept of reservation get dissolved. Most of the PSU enterprises provide for reservation in recruitment. With privatization, this would end and unnecessarily generate social unrest. Fourth is that PSUs as an helping hand will get also dissolved. Means government has been able to use its ownership to get banks and public enterprises to do so many things in an immediate basis during the pandemic. Now, this would not have been possible with private ownership. In this editorial, the author also mentioned that to understand the alternative model of privatization, first we have to understand the condition of different types of public sector undertakings. For this, author classified PSU in three categories. In first category, there are those enterprises which have been sick for a long time. Their technology, plant and machinery are obsolete while managerial and human resources have become inefficient. In second category, mention those enterprises which have been financially sick but can be turned around. Their difficulties can be traced to ministerial micromanagement, especially in enterprises with a direct consumer interface. For example, Air India and Indian Tourism Development Corporation hotels, that is ITDC hotels. Third category include those enterprises that are generating decent profits. So one size fit approach is not for all the categories of PSU. So Government of India must have a cautious approach towards PSUs. Now with respect to first category, government should close these in a time bound manner with a generous handshake for labor. that is good retirement policy for the labor. These enterprises may be taken away from their parent line ministers and brought under one holding company. The company should have the sole mandate of speedy liquidation and asset sale. Now for second category, private management through induction of a strategic partner is the best way to restore the value of these enterprises. They should ideally be made debt free, and the new management should be given freedom in personal management to get investors interest. Once debt free, management control with a 26% stake may be given. As valuation rises, the government could reduce its stake further and get more money. Now for the third category, the government can continue to reduce its shareholding by offloading shares. It can even reduce its stake to less than 51% while remaining the promoter and being in control. This would help in producing global champions as done by the China. The country, that is China, has 91 state-owned enterprises in the Fortune 500 list. Now, the expected main question is, few PSU need privatization approach, whereas rest demand some other approach. Comment. In The Hindu, there is an editorial titled Rattling Foreign Investors. A very good article. This editorial is important for GS3, that is International Trade and Investment Models. In this editorial, the author talks about the challenges that FDI, foreign direct investment, face in India. Recently, the Commerce Ministry reported that India attracted the highest ever FDI, that is $81.72 billion in 2021. However, several economists argue that the increase in FDI inflow is driven by short-term portfolio investment inflows and a few major acquisition deals involving select corporations. Despite significant increase in FDI, there are two major challenges that FDI face in India. Challenge one is dispute over interpretation of law. Means honoring contracts and enforcing awards are vital to attract the confidence of FDI investors. However, a lack of confidence in the host state's credibility towards the rule of law hampers FDI investment. There are some examples. For example, last year India had lost two high-profile bilateral investment treaty disputes with Vodafone and Cairn Energy on retrospective taxation. Further, Cairn has launched legal proceedings in the US to enforce the arbitral award of $1.2 billion by seizing the assets of Air India. Apart from this, the other set of high-profile bilateral investment treaty dispute comes from the cancellation of agreement between Antrix and Devas Multimedia. The agreement was arbitrarily annulled on the ground of national security. This annulment led to a commercial arbitration between Antrix and Devas Multimedia at the International Chamber of Commerce. However, India lost the case. The International Chamber of Commerce Arbitration Tribunal ordered Antrix to pay $1.2 billion to Devas after a US court confirmed the award earlier this year. Second challenge is non-compliance of judicial rulings. What is more worrisome is that whenever India loses a case to a foreign investor, immediate compliance rarely happens. Instead, efforts are made to delay the compliance as much as possible. For example, after the International Chamber Commerce Award, Indian agencies started investigating Devas, accusing it of corruption and fraud. Last month, the National Company Law Tribunal ordered the liquidation of Devas on the ground that the affairs of the company were being carried on with fraud activities. Further, the NCLT directed the official liquidator to prevent Devas from perpetuating its fraudulent activities and abusing the process of law in enforcing the ICC award. This has led to Devas issuing a notice of intention to initiate a new BIT arbitration against India. This non-compliant behavior on India's part shows a willful, disobedient attitude towards adverse judicial rulings. This will not help India in attracting global corporations to its shores to make for the world. Now, what is the expected mains question? Implementation of FDI policy in India have shaken the confidence of foreign investors. Examine.